Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5 and in Studio 2 today. I'm talking to Matthew Dickerson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, following the outcomes from the standing committee meetings which happened on last Thursday evening. Hello, Matthew.
Good afternoon. How are you going, Tony?
I'm going pretty well. Now, the first thing I think we should talk about, which is quite relevant to Wellington, there's been, I guess, further developments in the Wellington South Battery Energy Storage System. So things are moving on there. So where are we in the process with that?
So this is in relation to the planning agreement. This is a draft planning agreement. You and I have talked at length before, Tony, about the fact that the voluntary part of these planning agreements is a great frustration for council. We would love that to be as part of the legislation for the development application, but unfortunately it's not. So it's up to council to sit down with all of these 37 proponents that will go through our res and basically work out some sort of payment to council, to the community as part of these projects. The Arana Battery Energy Storage System, we've done that. This is an offer, a formal offer from Acacia Energy, which then went through our committee meetings. And this planning agreement is in relation to the Arana Battery Energy Storage System, which is at 6945 Goulmer Road. So essentially, this is a state significant development. So we're not the consent authority, but they need to have a discussion with us around this. So at this stage, we've managed to negotiate a $3.2 million offer, and that's over the life of the project, over 20 years. There'll be essentially $1.3 million paid at commencement and then $160,000 paid indexed each year from year 8 onwards from essentially the anniversary of the commencement of operations. So the first monetary contribution will be used for the Wellington Road Shared Pathway, and then the annual contributions will be to deliver benefits from our renewable energy framework, if you like, for benefits for Wellington and around that particular area there. So I would love to get more out of these. We do our best to basically maximise the income from these various projects, but any amount we get is more than we've got now, so at least that's some benefit for the community.
Okay, so stand by for more reports about that and see how successful you'll be in relation to the amount of money you get and when that's going to happen, I guess.
Well, that one should be right. So that one, basically, we've had the negotiations with Acacia, and this is the complicated part, Tony. We've got to have negotiations first. We've got to get the proponent to a certain level of agreement before we then bring it to council. It's then gone to committees, and it'll go to council next week. And then once it goes to council, it'll then go on public display for 28 days, and then it'll come back from that public display for council to finally resolve that. The problem is, if we say, no, that's not enough, which I'd always like to say, no, that's not enough, I'd like to see more money, then Acacia don't have to agree to more because it's a voluntary process. So this is the great frustration. Normally, wherever we get to in the discussions, in the negotiations, normally we get to the stage where we go, well, we've pretty much got to accept that after the negotiations it might involve our staff or myself and get to a certain point, because we could say no at a council meeting, but they could just turn around and say, well, instead of giving you $3.2 million, we'll give you $0, because they don't have to give us money. So it is a frustrating process.
All right, Matthew, the next tab off the rank is the Dubbo Regional Housing Roadmap Progress Report. I'm just wondering where Wellington fits into this, because as everybody around here knows, there is a shortage of housing. It's not easy to buy a house. There's just not enough of them and not enough quality variation in the housing market either as well. So where are they up to with this?
So I'll talk about the big picture first, then I'll talk about individually when we get to Wellington. So way back in June 2022, we as council adopted a housing roadmap, and that really identified some initiatives, some actions, some projects that will help the community's housing needs. Now, we don't have any plans to go out and build a bunch of houses. We don't think that's council's role to do that, but we can be influential in providing strategic planning, in appropriate policy, guidance material, so we can have some influence on that, and that's where the roadmap, we believe, gives some sort of influence in that process. Now, in having said that, We've got a number of different areas that are being developed at the moment, and we also look at median sales prices, and we had some in that particular report, some reports of median sales prices for Wellington, for example, and we look way back to December 2019, median house price was around $150,000, and now we're getting up around March last year, it got to almost $300,000, and it's kind of hovered around that level. It's back a little bit now, probably more like $275,000 at the last report we had at the end of last year. So there's certainly been an increase in the house prices. That's obviously seen an increase in the Dubbo housing prices as well, but focusing again just on Wellington there. And then we look at also a number of different release areas and to see what's happening there. And there's a number of those in Dubbo, but we've also got one there where we're talking about a structure plan for land at Montefiores in Wellington. So we've created a scope of works for that structure plan, and we're getting quotes from consultants to undertake that body of work. We've also got some information around the villages that are around our particular area and the Wellington town strategy as well. So we're seeking some grant funding to undertake a body of work around a Wellington town strategy. Short-term worker accommodation is another part. That's some of that short-term worker accommodation for the res might be in Dubbo, some of that might be in Wellington. Again, we want to be able to have options there for developers and proponents to be able to look at that. So bottom line here is that we can't solve the housing crisis by ourselves, but we can actually make sure all the strategic steps are in place to make sure that we can continue to help solve the housing crisis.
Okay. And in recent times, of course, the Regional Council has seen the wars when it comes to the water supply, whether it's fluoridation or chlorination or the pumps, whatever it might be. So is there something going on here?
It may well be the age, it may well be a bit of bad luck, but there's been some issues, you're right. We've had Mumble, had to go on boil water alert for a short period of time. We had we actually asked people in Wellington to restrict their water usage because there was a failure with another centre at Wellington. So there's been a couple of issues there. And it is an incredibly complicated system with the various water treatment plants that we have across the LGA. And we need to make sure that the first and foremost thing is we're treating water to the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines, and we are continually testing that to make sure that's the case. In the case of Mumble, when we did pick up that something wasn't right, we quickly put a boil water alert on, reported that to the New South Wales government. So the steps are in place there around that process. And again, it's one of those things that there are so many moving parts literally in these water treatment plants. There are times when things don't happen correctly. And again, with the various water treatment plants we've got, some of those things happen. One of the things that we've certainly changed as a result of this new council is one of the things that went through our Infrastructure Planning and Environment Committee meeting on Thursday night, and that was to present to the community our annual Drinking Water Management System annual report. And the reason we did this, the reason this comes to a committee meeting and then goes out to the public so that everyone can see that, is, as you well know, we had no fluoride in the water that started, this is in Dubbo only, in January 2019. And the public didn't know about that. No action was taken to address that. It was only when the new council was on council and I was actually having a conversation with someone and they suggested that we didn't have fluoride, and I thought that was crazy talk because we have to have fluoride in our water. If you look at the 1957 Fluoridation of Public Water Act, then we have to have fluoride in the water if we've told the community we do. And I made some inquiries and the general manager said the same as me, that we definitely had fluoride in the water. But of course, we investigated further and found there wasn't fluoride in the water. When we went back and looked further, the report was done by our staff, but unfortunately, people higher up the chain did nothing about it. So in our Infrastructure Planning and Environment Committee meeting, if you're so inclined, you can go and look at that full report that's reported through to the government each year. And that was given to the government previously when we had no fluoride, but the community weren't told about it. Councillors did nothing about that particular one. So now the community can see exactly what's happening there, and they can see exactly what's happening with all of our water treatment plants and to see how they're performing. And again, I would say not perfectly, but we're not trying to hide anything. It's all there. The information is all there for people to look at and make decisions based on that.
Okay. Now, just getting to another hot topic that's even relevant to Wellington here, and that is the situation with the Dubbo Regional Sale Yards. Not sure what you call them that, but certainly the concern here is that if it's got, of course, it's currently I suppose, run under the council's umbrella, and there is an option to privatise it, and lots of different other possible options. Of course, at the end of the day, what is of a concern is, here we have government putting out the idea of let's privatise this or put it out to the public sector, or should I say the private sector, for them to run it instead. And of course, this raises all sorts of issues about, okay, that's fine, but will there be competition? Will it mean cheaper prices for farmers accessing those markets? Will it be workable? Or will it wind up like a lot of other government services over the years that have been hired off to private enterprise, where it only results in a lack of competition and a whole lot of expenses to everybody that's using those services? So what's your feeling on this particular subject?
This is one where we've got to make a change, Tony. That's the starting point is we've got to make a change. There's been changes in legislation, a whole range of changes in legislation, keeping in mind that these sale yards started around 1950. As you can imagine, from that point in time, there's been some changes. They can be around animal welfare, they can be around work, health and safety, and those changes can also be around the concept of public-private partnership or how you work with different organisations. At the moment, council owns those sale yards, but the control of some of those sales is typically done by the Dubbo Stock and Station agents, and there's a complicated arrangement in place there. And that's some of the advice that we've received with some changes in legislation, that we need to change that operating model in terms of the way that operates at the moment. Essentially, council would need to take on more control of that whole operation. And then we started asking the question, well, if council's got to take on more control, is council, as in the organisation, really set up to run sales, really set up to run the Dubbo regional livestock markets? What's the best way to go forward with that? So we've gone through a process now, we're currently in that process, where we're doing an expression of interest process to see if there's any organisations out there that would like to lease the sale yards from council, or even buy the sale yards from council and continue to run those sales, obviously, or whether we change our operating model. And it's essentially to do the best thing we can by the overall community. This is a community-owned asset. To do the best thing we can by the community, we need to look at all those options and make a decision on what's best for the community. One of the things that people have said to me is that we have a good economic injector in the Dubbo regional livestock markets, and I absolutely agree. They are good when we have sale days on. People do come to Dubbo. They do spend money in Dubbo. They spend money on local businesses, so it is a good economic injector. But if anyone did lease or buy those sale yards, they wouldn't be shutting them down for two reasons. One, if you're going to go and pay that money to lease or buy them, then you're not going to do that to shut it down. And secondly, we would have a clause in the contract that they would have to keep running those as sale yards for a certain number of years, because again, they are good for Dubbo, and anyone that did buy them would continue to run them as sale yards for at least whatever minimum number of years we would dictate, but again, for as many years as they could, because obviously they want to keep generating money out of the investment they would made from them. In terms of competition, that's an interesting one. There's a lot of competition in terms of sale yards around the state. You've got places like Wagga, you've got the Central West Livestock Exchange over in Forbes, you've got Tamworth, you've got the Richmond Valley Council, you've got Central Tablelands Livestock Exchange. You've got a whole range of different councils, or not always owned by councils, but a whole range of different sale yards around the state. And people choose where they go based on a number of different factors in terms of where they're going to get a good price, how much it costs to transport to those areas, what they think of the sale yards, etc. Dubbo at the moment is the number one sale yards in terms of cattle, and number three across the state this is, and number three in terms of sheep. So it's certainly a good sale yards in terms of that sheer volume, and that's an attractive part of it. But no decision has been made, and I can't stress that enough, Tony. No decision has been made by councillors at this stage. It really is seeing what options are available to us, whether we sell, whether we lease, whether we change the operating model. Something's going to change. I can't tell you what that will be yet because I don't know.
Okay, so is council considering doing an in-depth study on this particular topic so that they are properly informed about what's going to be best in the long run?
So that's been going on for the last year or more. Tony. Councillors have been out to the sale yards. We've met out there at the sale yards. We've actually went through and watched sales in operation. I've been out there a number of times over the years that I've been involved with council, but newer councillors, they've certainly been out there. We've had solicitors, we've had advisors, we've had a range of people in various meetings. We've certainly got our sale yards committee, which we meet with on a regular basis. So there's been a lot of discussion already, and certainly there'll be more information that we brought forward to us as is processed. What we need to do is make sure we've got the appropriate data, because we've got to make decisions. Ultimately, that's what the job of a councillor is, to make decisions. So we'll get as much information, as much data as we possibly can to make a decision. And even if you look around the state, you've got a few that are still council owned and operated. So you've got places like Wagga and Forbes that are still council owned and operated. You've got places like Tamworth that's owned privately. You've got the Northern Rivers, which is leased out. You've got the Central Tablelands and the South Eastern Livestock Exchange, both owned privately, as well as the one at Inverell and the one at Maitland are both operated privately. So you've got a range of different options around the state, and we'll look at some of those options as well. And I've been to some of those sale yards to look at how they operate and talk to the operators there. Again, it's about gathering information, and we would be doing the wrong thing by the community, Tony, if we didn't consider all options. But keep in mind, the Dubbo Stock and Station agents who run sales there at the moment, there is no reason at all. They couldn't also put in a expression of interest for a lease or to buy the sale yards. And essentially for people that go and use the sale yards now, their main interaction is with the Dubbo Stock and Station agents, not council. So their interaction could remain identical, because they could obviously put in an EOI for sale or lease.
Okay. So I guess it gets back to the same question a little bit, and that is council going to have a mechanism like an arm's length study to ensure that there's a balanced assessment of what's the best move forward?
Well, when you say arm's length, we've had independent advisors, independent legal people, independent government officers who have been giving us advice up to this point in time, and that will continue. So it's people without a vested interest, and it's people without something that they've got a certain outcome that they want to achieve. So certainly we've been looking at that independent advice already, and we'll continue to look at that. And again, the EOI process, people will be biased in that, because if someone wanted to buy it, they'd be very focused on buying it, but that will just be more data for us to add into the mix of what we do going forward.
Okay, so in other words, the councillors will be making the final decision on this.
Oh, absolutely. As with any council decision, it's a council or group decision. It's not made by any individual councillor. It's not made by me. It's made by a majority vote of councillors. It's not made by the staff. It's made by a majority group of councillors or a majority of councillors. That's the way the democratic process works for any of these decisions we make.
Sure, but would it be based on the recommendations of a study and the report that's been produced?
It'll be based on all the data we gather along the way, Tony. That's obviously, I can't talk about every councillor, how they make a decision, but without a doubt, the way I'll make a decision is based on all the information, all the data, and conversations you have, and experience and knowledge of what's happened at the sale yards over many years. So put all that into the mix to basically come up with the best outcome for the overall community.
Okay. All right, you've been listening to Matthew Dickerson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, with myself, Tony Graham, on Binjang 91.5.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Matthew.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.